22 Years of Lies, My Wife's Shocking Affair, and Vindictive Aftermath. If you enjoy these crazy stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And hey, if you didn't like it, go ahead and hit dislike. I won't hold it against you. Let's get into it. Hey Reddit, I'm posting this because I honestly don't know where else to turn. My world has completely imploded in the last few days and I'm struggling to even breathe, let alone process everything. I need to get this out, maybe hear some unbiased perspectives, or just feel less alone in this nightmare. I'm 52 years old. I've been married to Sarah for 22 wonderful years, or so I thought. We met in our late 20s, fell head over heels, and built a life together that I genuinely believed was strong and unbreakable. We have 2 kids, a daughter Emily, who's now in her final year of college, and a son Michael, who just started his first job out of state. For the past 2 decades, Sarah has been my rock, my confidant, the love of my life. We've been through ups and downs, career changes, raising kids, the usual life stuff, but we always came out stronger on the other side, or so I believed. Looking back now, the cracks were there. Subtle at first, like hairline fractures in a seemingly solid wall. Sarah had started to change about a year ago, maybe even a little before that. It wasn't a dramatic shift, more like a gradual erosion of the familiar. One of the first things I noticed was her increased focus on her appearance. Sarah had always taken care of herself, but she started spending more time getting ready, experimenting with new makeup, and buying clothes that seemed younger than her usual style. It wasn't just a new lipstick or a different hairstyle, it was a complete overhaul. She started buying trendy outfits from stores our daughter used to frequent, clothes that felt too tight and revealing for a woman her age. I remember thinking she looked great, that she was taking good care of herself, especially as we were both getting older. I even complimented her, and she seemed pleased, but there was a certain guardedness in her reaction that I didn't quite register at the time. Now I see it for what it was, a thrill she didn't want to share with me, a secret she was keeping, a performance for someone else's eyes. She also became incredibly secretive with her phone. It used to be that our phones were just tools lying around the house, accessible to either of us if needed. We'd often show each other funny memes or news articles, but suddenly Sarah's phone was always glued to her hand or face down on the table. If I walked into the room, she'd often quickly minimize whatever was on the screen or even turn it off altogether. When I'd ask what she was doing, she'd often laugh it off, saying, "Just browse silly things, Mark. You'd be so bored." Or sometimes with a slight roll of her eyes, "Honestly, you're starting to sound a little paranoid." I'd chuckle, feeling a bit foolish for even asking, not wanting to be the insecure husband. But now I realize those nervous giggles and dismissive tones were carefully constructed to deflect any suspicion. Her social life also seemed to ramp up. Sarah had a close group of girlfriends, and they would occasionally go out for dinner or a movie. But these outings became more frequent and lasted longer. Weekends away with the girls started appearing on the calendar, trips that were always a bit vague on the details. Just relaxing, she'd say, or catching up. I encouraged her to go, thinking it was good for her to have her own time and her own friends. I even offered to take care of things at home so she could enjoy herself without worrying. Once she mentioned a weekend trip with her friend Carol to a spa retreat. I even helped her pack. Later, I ran into Carol at the grocery store, and when I asked how her relaxing spa weekend was, she looked genuinely confused and said she had spent it at home nursing a bad cold and binge watching old movies. Sarah had lied straight to my face, and I hadn't even questioned it, so complete was my trust. Then there was the emotional distance. It wasn't constant, but there were moments when I felt like Sarah was absent. We'd be sitting on the couch watching TV, a show we used to enjoy together, and she'd seem miles away, her eyes glazed over, a faint smile playing on her lips that wasn't directed at me. When I'd try to talk to her about something important, a work issue, or something about the kids, she'd seem distracted, her responses perfunctory. "Don't be such a worrywart, Mark," she'd say if I brought up anything that concerned me, making me feel like my feelings were invalid. I chalked it up to stress from work or maybe just her needing some quiet time. I'm not the most emotionally attuned person, I told myself, always ready to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I was just imagining things. About a month before I found the necklace, I remember a specific incident. It was our wedding anniversary, and I had planned a special date night, made reservations at our favorite restaurant, the one where we had our first date, and even bought her a beautiful bouquet of her favorite lilies. When I told Sarah, her reaction was lukewarm at best. She sighed dramatically and said she was exhausted from work and just wanted to stay in. I was deeply disappointed, feeling like our anniversary meant less to her than a night of solitude, but I tried to be understanding, suggesting we could still have a nice dinner at home. We ended up having takeout on the couch, and she spent most of the evening scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I felt like my efforts, my thoughtfulness, meant absolutely nothing to her. Another time, I was in the garage tinkering with my old motorcycle when I heard Sarah on the phone in the kitchen. I couldn't make out the whole conversation, but I clearly heard her say to someone, her tone laced with exasperation, "Mark just doesn't understand me anymore. It's like we're living completely separate lives. He's so predictable." It stung deeply, making me question everything I thought we had. But when I asked her about it later, she just laughed it off, saying I must have misheard or misinterpreted her conversation with a colleague about a work project. I even remember once mentioning that I was thinking of taking up golf again, a hobby I had enjoyed in my younger years but had let slide due to work and family commitments. Sarah scoffed and said, with a dismissive wave of her hand, "Seriously, Mark? Golf? Isn't that a bit old manish for you? Maybe you should stick to your crossword puzzles." Her comment, meant to be a joke perhaps, felt like a sharp jab at my age and made me feel incredibly self-conscious and unattractive. The appearance of Jake on her phone was the first real red flag that I couldn't easily dismiss. The secretive smiles, the way she'd clutch her phone when his name popped up, it was different from how she reacted to messages from her friends or even our kids. There was a certain giddiness, a spark in her eyes that I hadn't seen directed at me in years. When I asked about him, her explanation seemed plausible enough at the time. "Oh, just a new guy at work. He's in marketing." But now, replaying those moments in my head, I can see the subtle signs of deception in her eyes, the slight hesitation in her voice, the way she avoided my gaze. I just didn't want to see them then. I trusted her, implicitly, and that trust was my undoing. The discovery of the necklace tucked away in her jewelry box, a delicate silver chain with an intertwined heart pendant that I certainly hadn't bought her, and the complete absence of any conference details on her calendar sent me spiraling. The flimsy excuse about an out-of-town work event suddenly crumbled under the weight of this tangible evidence. I couldn't just sit there and pretend everything was normal. I needed answers, even if I was terrified of what those answers might be. The next morning, after a sleepless night filled with anxiety and a growing sense of betrayal that gnawed at my insides, I decided to do something I never thought I'd be capable of. I went through Sarah's phone. I know it's a massive invasion of privacy, and the old me, the man who believed in respecting boundaries, would have been disgusted with myself. But the man I was last week feels like a stranger now, replaced by someone desperate and grasping at straws, willing to do anything to uncover the truth. Her phone was locked, of course. Sarah has always been very private about her devices, insisting on her personal space in the digital realm. Usually I respected that, never even considering looking through her phone. But now her privacy felt like a deliberately constructed wall she had built between us, brick by deceitful brick. I tried our anniversary, our kids' birthdays, common pins. Nothing worked. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Then, a stupidly obvious thought struck me, a detail I had overlooked in my panicked attempts. Her birthday. I typed it in, and the phone unlocked. My stomach churned with a sickening lurch. It felt like the universe was confirming my worst fears, granting me access to the secrets she had so carefully guarded. I went straight to her messages, my fingers trembling as I navigated the apps. The first thing I saw was a string of texts with Jake. The frequency and timing of the messages alone sent a shiver down my spine. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the phone steady as I opened the conversation. What I found inside made my heart shatter into a million jagged pieces. each shard a fresh wave of agonizing pain. Can't wait to see you tonight, my love. Thinking of you all day. That presentation was so boring, but seeing you made it worthwhile. You looked absolutely stunning in that dress yesterday. I couldn't take my eyes off you. Every other woman in that room faded into the background. Missing your touch already, counting down the hours until we can be together again. Maybe we can skip the movie and just stay in? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Tonight? Yesterday? Together again? The winky faces, the fire emoji. This wasn't some innocent work friendship. This was an affair. A full-blown, emotional, and likely physical affair, conducted right under my roof. I scrolled further back in the conversation, my breath catching in my throat with each agonizing revelation. The messages went back months, filled with pet names, inside jokes, and blatant flirtation. Months of lies, deception, and betrayal right under my nose in the same bed we shared. How could I have been so utterly blind, so completely trusting? Then I saw something that made my blood run even colder. A message that twisted the knife in my already wounded heart. A message from about 6 months ago. Happy anniversary, my beautiful Sarah. 22 years, and you still take my breath away. I love you more than words can say. Forever and always, Mark. I remembered sending that message, feeling so lucky and grateful for the life we had built together. Below it, a reply from Sarah to Jake, sent just hours later. Ugh, had to endure the usual anniversary dinner, so glad I have you to look forward to later. You make me feel alive again. This marriage feels like a suffocating tomb sometimes. Alive again? Suffocating tomb? What the hell was that supposed to mean? Had our entire marriage, the foundation of my life, been a lie? Was she this unhappy all this time, secretly resenting me and our life together? The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. I kept digging, forcing myself to endure the excruciating pain of each new discovery. I found pictures, not explicit, but intimate selfies of Sarah smiling, looking genuinely happy and carefree, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in years, all sent directly to Jake. I found voice notes filled with laughter, whispered secrets, and the sound of them clearly in each other's company. I even saw notifications from a dating app pop up briefly before disappearing, a fleeting glimpse into another layer of her deceit, further twisting the knife in my gut. And then I found the name. It wasn't just Jake. His full name was Jake Miller, and his profile picture showed a young man, probably in his late 20s or early 30s, with a cocky, almost arrogant grin and eyes that seemed to mock me from the screen, as if he knew the pain he was inflicting. Younger than our daughter Emily, younger than me by at least 2 decades. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My wife, the woman I had loved and cherished for 22 years, was having an affair with a man young enough to be our son. The utter disrespect, the complete disregard for our vows and our family. I felt a primal rage building inside me, a burning fury mixed with an overwhelming sense of grief, devastation, and a profound feeling of being utterly and completely betrayed. I went through her call logs. Numerous calls to Jake, often late at night, calls that she had always attributed to work emergencies if I happened to notice. I checked her emails, wading through a swamp of lies and deceit. More of the same, coded messages disguised as work correspondence that were clearly anything but. I even found one email exchange where Jake bragged to a friend, "Scored big time, like, man, this older married woman at work is totally into me. Easy pickings, she buys me lunch all the time." The sheer arrogance and disrespect in his words made my blood boil, and the thought of Sarah being so easily manipulated and taken advantage of, while simultaneously betraying me, filled me with a sickening mix of anger and shame. The more I found, the more my heart sank into an abyss of despair. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of weakness, a momentary lapse in judgment. This had been going on for a significant amount of time, and it was deep, intricate, and filled with calculated lies. I sat on the edge of our bed, Sarah's phone clutched in my hand like a venomous snake, the weight of her betrayal crushing me, making it hard to breathe. 22 years. 22 years of building a life together, of sharing dreams, raising our children, supporting each other through thick and thin, all seemingly built on a foundation of lies, a carefully constructed illusion that had now shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Sarah came home late Monday afternoon around 6:30, acting as if nothing was amiss, breezing through the door with a bright, albeit slightly forced, smile. She gave me a perfunctory hug, a quick peck on the cheek that felt cold and insincere, and asked about my weekend in a tone that suggested she was merely going through the motions. I just stared at her, my face probably giving away the storm raging inside me, the pain and fury etched into every line. "What's wrong, Mark? You look awful," she asked, a hint of nervousness flickering in her eyes, though she quickly masked it with a concerned frown. I didn't say a word. I simply held up her phone, the damning message thread with Jake Miller, filled with their sickeningly sweet exchanges and blatant lies. Open on the screen, the bright light illuminating the extent of her betrayal. Her face drained of color, the practiced smile vanishing instantly, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Her eyes widened in a desperate plea, and she lunged for the phone, her hand outstretched, but I pulled it away, holding it just out of her reach. "What is this, Sarah?" I asked, my voice dangerously low, trembling not just with anger, but with a profound sense of hurt and disbelief. Each word felt like a shard of glass tearing its way out of my throat. She stammered, her mind clearly racing, trying to come up with some flimsy excuse, some utterly implausible explanation. It's not what it looks like, Mark, I swear. He's just a friend from work. We were just discussing a project." Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route. "Oh, really? A friend? A work project that involves calling each other my love and talking about missing each other's touch? Is that how you conduct business these days, Sarah? Looks like my wife of 22 years has been having a torrid affair with some kid young enough to be our son." The words exploded out of me, raw and guttural, filled with years of trust that had been so callously shattered. The dam of my emotions had finally broken. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they looked more like tears of being caught than genuine remorse. "Mark, please, just let me explain. It's complicated." "Explain what, Sarah? Explain how you could lie to me for months? Explain how you could sneak around, betray our marriage, our family, everything we've built together on a foundation of trust and love? Explain how you could look me in the eye every day and pretend everything was fine while you were exchanging these disgusting messages with him?" She started to cry, big, heaving sobs that seemed designed to elicit sympathy. But all I felt was a cold, hard knot of resentment in my chest. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened, Mark. I was vulnerable. Didn't mean for it to happen. Sarah, you don't just accidentally fall into an affair. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a choice, Sarah. A conscious decision you made, over and over again, every time you texted him, every time you met him, every time you lied to me. Were you thinking about me then? About our kids? About the vows you made to me in front of our family and friends all those years ago? She finally broke down, the tears flowing freely now, whether from guilt or self-pity, I couldn't tell. She confessed to everything, her words tumbling out in a desperate torrent. It started a few months ago, she said, around the time Jake joined her company. They started working closely together on a project, and somehow she claimed things just escalated. He was young, charming, and apparently made her feel seen and appreciated in a way she felt I hadn't in a while. Seen? I scoffed, the word dripping with sarcasm. Appreciated? I've seen you every single day for 22 years, Sarah. I've loved you, cherished you, supported you through every single high and low, been your partner, your best friend, your everything. How dare you say I haven't seen you or appreciated you? She mumbled something about feeling like she was getting older, invisible, and that Jake made her feel young and desirable again, like she still had it. You've been so focused on work lately, Mark, she added, a pathetic attempt to deflect responsibility and subtly shift the blame onto me, as if my dedication to providing for our family somehow justified her infidelity. It was the same tired, pathetic cliche you hear in every story about affairs. It didn't make it hurt any less. In fact, it made my anger burn even hotter. I asked her how long it had been going on. She initially tried to downplay it, saying it was only a few weeks, a silly mistake. But when I showed her the messages dating back months, the undeniable proof of her prolonged deception staring her in the face, she finally broke down and admitted it had been closer to 6 months. 6 months of lies, sneaking around, and betraying the very foundation of our life together. I asked her about the necklace, the tangible symbol of her betrayal. She confessed that Jake had given it to her for her birthday, just a few weeks ago. My birthday was last month, and she had given me a generic gift card. She wore that necklace, given to her by her lover, to our anniversary dinner, the same dinner where she texted Jake about how much she couldn't wait to see him later. The level of disrespect, the sheer callousness of her actions, was staggering, almost unbelievable. "Maybe we were never really right for each other, Mark," she blurted out at one point, her voice laced with a strange mix of defensiveness and self-pity, a statement that cut me to the core, and made me question everything I thought I knew about our life together. Her concern seemed to be more about the fact that I had discovered her affair than the profound pain and devastation she had inflicted upon me and our family. I wanted to know everything, every sordid detail. How far had it gone? She initially hesitated, her eyes filled with shame, but under my relentless questioning, my desperate need to understand the depth of her betrayal, she finally admitted that they had been sleeping together for the past few months, meeting up during lunch breaks, after work, whenever she could sneak away. The thought of her with him, someone so young, so not me, made my stomach churn with a violent wave of disgust and a profound sense of violation. The conversation went on for what felt like an eternity, stretching into the early hours of the morning. I was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, white-hot anger, crushing sadness, utter confusion, and a profound sense of disbelief that the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, could be capable of such calculated deceit. Sarah mostly cried, her face buried in her hands, begging for my forgiveness, saying it was a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness, that she still loved me, that she didn't want to lose me or our family. But the words felt hollow, rehearsed, lacking any genuine sincerity. How could I ever trust her again? How could I look at her and not see the image of her with another man, a younger man, a constant reminder of her infidelity and my own foolishness? The foundation of our marriage had crumbled, and I couldn't see any way to rebuild it from the ashes of her betrayal. Over the next few days, as the initial shock began to subside, a cold, hard anger began to settle in its place. I found myself obsessing over Jake Miller, this faceless name that had become the embodiment of my wife's betrayal. Who was this person who had so easily waltzed into our lives and stolen my wife's affection, or at least her physical attention? I did what anyone would do in this day and age. I looked him up online, driven by a morbid curiosity and a burning need to understand. His social media profiles were public, filled with the self-absorbed pronouncements and filtered realities of youth. He was indeed young, probably around 30, with a carefully cultivated image of a carefree, successful young professional. His profile painted a picture of someone with little genuine depth or ambition. Mostly photos of him partying with his equally vapid friends, posing in front of expensive cars he likely couldn't afford, and vague motivational posts about hustling in some undefined marketing role. He worked in marketing, just like Sarah said, but his online presence screamed of superficiality. His posts were full of the typical youthful exuberance, pictures with friends, heavily filtered travel photos, mostly budget backpacking trips to obscure locations, and countless gym selfies showcasing his toned physique. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, no discernible talent or passion beyond the superficial, which somehow made it even more infuriating. What did he have that I didn't? A youthful physique, a complete lack of morals, and the audacity to pursue a married woman 2 decades his senior, apparently. I found his LinkedIn profile, which presented a slightly more polished version of himself, but still revealed a relatively short and unremarkable career history. He had only been working at Sarah's company for about 8 months, meaning their affair had likely started within weeks of his arrival. So, their entire story about a developing work collaboration was a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed lie to mask their illicit activities. I even found his family's information, though I resisted the urge to contact them. He lived in a small, cluttered apartment across town, seemingly still relying on his parents for financial support based on some of his more revealing social media comments and the fact that he drove an older, beat-up car. The thought of this man, this immature and seemingly irresponsible individual, having an affair with my wife, the mother of my children, filled me with a profound sense of disbelief and disgust. I briefly considered driving there, confronting him, demanding an explanation, but I knew that would only make things worse, potentially escalating the situation and causing more pain for everyone involved. What would I even say? Stay away from my wife? He probably already knew she was married and clearly didn't care about the devastation he was causing. The more I learned about him, the more I felt a sense of bewilderment and a growing anger towards Sarah for her poor judgment. What did she see in him? Was it just the novelty of youth? The thrill of something forbidden? Did he offer her something I hadn't? Or was this simply a midlife crisis manifesting in the most destructive way possible? I even noticed Sarah had started using younger slang in her text messages to me, trying to sound hip and cool, and had begun following some of the same vapid social media influencers that Jake followed, posting generic comments on their photos. It felt desperate, foolish, and like she was trying to become someone she wasn't, all for the sake of this fleeting infatuation. The hardest part of all this, the constant, agonizing weight on my chest, has been thinking about our kids. Our daughter Emily is 21 and in her senior year of college, just on the cusp of starting her own life. Our son Michael is 24 and just moved to another state to start his first real job after graduation, finally taking those first steps into adulthood. They've always been our priority, the center of our world, and the thought of how this devastating news will shatter their perception of their parents and their family is almost unbearable. Sarah and I had initially planned to tell them together when Emily came home for her spring break, hoping to present a united front, even though the chasm between us felt wider than the Grand Canyon. The week leading up to her arrival was filled with a suffocating tension in the house, a thick, unspoken dread hanging in the air. We barely spoke, the silence punctuated only by Sarah's occasional tearful apologies, which often felt hollow and self-serving. When Emily finally arrived, her usual bright and cheerful demeanor clouded with a sense of unease. The forced normalcy in the house was palpable, like a thin sheet of ice threatening to crack at any moment. We tried to have a regular family dinner that first night, ordering her favorite takeout. But the unspoken truth hung heavy in the air, casting a dark shadow over the meal. Michael joined us via video call, his usual cheerful and joking demeanor replaced by a guarded seriousness, his eyes constantly flicking between his mother and me, sensing that something was terribly wrong. After a strained and largely silent dinner, Sarah and I sat them down in the living room, the weight of the impending conversation pressing down on us. I started, my voice trembling slightly as I explained that there was something incredibly important and difficult we needed to tell them, something that would change everything. Sarah sat beside me on the couch, her eyes red and swollen, her hands nervously fidgeting in her lap. As I laid out the bare facts, the devastating truth of Sarah's affair, the discovery of her betrayal, and the immense uncertainty about our future as a family, the color drained from Emily's face. Her initial reaction was one of stunned silence, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend the words I was saying. She just stared at us, her mouth slightly agape, her youthful innocence visibly shattered. Michael, on the other end of the video call, looked like he had been punched in the gut, his usual easygoing expression replaced by a mask of shock and anger. Then the questions started, hesitant at first, then growing in intensity. Emily's were soft, almost pleading. "Mom, is it true? You had an affair?" Sarah could only nod, tears silently streaming down her face, unable to meet her daughter's gaze. "With someone? Younger?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper, laced with a mixture of hurt and confusion. Again, Sarah nodded, her shame evident. Michael was far more direct, his voice filled with a raw, unfiltered anger that I had rarely heard from him. "How could you do this, Mom? To Dad? To us, after all these years of us being a family?" His disappointment was palpable, even through the static of the video call, his voice cracking with emotion. Sarah tried to explain, to apologize, to make them understand her motivations, her feelings of inadequacy and insecurity. She talked about feeling lost and invisible, about how Jake, with his youthful attention, had made her feel young and attractive again. "Your father hasn't been as attentive lately," she even tried to say, her voice trembling, subtly attempting to shift the blame and garner some sympathy. But her words, filled with flimsy excuses and half-truths, seemed to fall flat, especially with Michael, who saw right through her attempts at manipulation. "So you just threw away everything, our entire family, for some pathetic little fling?" he asked, his voice laced with contempt and disgust. 22 years, Mom? You just tossed it all away like it meant nothing? And with some loser who probably still lives with his parents and has no idea what real responsibility is? Emily, usually the more reserved and empathetic one, finally broke down, her composure crumbling. Tears streamed down her face as she asked the question that hung heavy in the air, the question that echoed my own deepest fears. "Did you ever really love us, Mom? Did you ever truly love Dad?" Her question hung in the silence, unanswered, a testament to the profound damage Sarah had inflicted. Later that night, I overheard Emily talking to a friend on the phone, her voice choked with tears. "I just don't understand how she could do this to him," she sobbed, her words a balm to my wounded soul, but a sharp indictment of Sarah's actions. Michael was so consumed by anger and a fierce loyalty to me that he initially refused to speak to Sarah at all. He sent me a text message later that night, a simple but powerful expression of his support. "Dad, I'm so incredibly sorry. She doesn't deserve you." He didn't answer Sarah's calls for weeks, his silence a deafening condemnation of her betrayal. Sarah, desperate to salvage some semblance of a relationship with our children, tried to manipulate the situation, telling Emily that I was being unreasonable and that we should all try to work through this as a family, as if her affair was a minor disagreement we could simply talk our way out of. She even tried to guilt trip them, playing the victim and saying she was going through a difficult time and needed their love and support, completely ignoring the immense pain she had caused them and me. But the kids, especially Michael, saw right through her pathetic attempts to rewrite the narrative. Emily, though deeply hurt and confused, remained mostly by my side, offering quiet gestures of comfort and support. Michael's anger towards Sarah remained a palpable and unwavering barrier, a constant reminder of the irreparable damage she had caused. The initial fragile agreement to put off any major decisions about our future didn't last long. The more I replayed Sarah's betrayal in my mind, the more I looked at her and saw not the woman I loved, but a stranger who had systematically deceived and hurt me. The more I realized that there was simply no path forward for us as a married couple. The foundation of trust had been utterly destroyed, and I couldn't fathom a future where I could ever fully believe in her again. When I finally told Sarah, my voice flat and devoid of emotion, that I wanted a divorce, she was predictably devastated. The reality of her actions and their consequences seemed to finally hit her. She begged me to reconsider, her tears flowing freely once more, promising to do anything, absolutely anything, to save our marriage, even suggesting therapy. But my mind was made up, the decision final. The image of her intertwined with that younger man was constantly flashing in my mind, a toxic poison that tainted every memory we had ever shared, making it impossible to even look at her without feeling a surge of anger and disgust. The divorce proceedings were far from the amicable separation I had initially hoped for the sake of our children. Sarah, initially appearing remorseful and resigned to the consequences of her actions, seemed to undergo a complete and rather alarming transformation. Perhaps fueled by a deep-seated fear of being alone in her 50s, or a warped sense of entitlement after 22 years of marriage where she had grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle, she became increasingly aggressive, demanding, and vindictive. She hired a high-powered lawyer, a notorious divorce attorney known for her ruthless tactics and ability to squeeze every last penny out of the opposing party. Sarah tried to claim a significant and frankly outrageous portion of our shared assets, arguing that she had sacrificed her career to raise our children, conveniently overlooking the fact that she had always worked, held a successful and well-paying job for most of our marriage, and had actively pursued her professional ambitions. She even had the audacity to try and demand a substantial amount of permanent spousal support, claiming she would be utterly unable to support herself despite her education and work history. I was utterly shocked and disgusted by her sudden and complete shift in demeanor. The tearful, seemingly contrite woman from the initial confrontation had completely vanished, replaced by someone cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of empathy. It felt like yet another profound betrayal, a further erosion of the image I had held of her for so long. I had no choice but to hire my own lawyer, a seasoned professional who warned me that this was going to be a nasty and emotionally draining battle. The legal proceedings were indeed brutal and incredibly expensive, with Sarah's lawyer employing every dirty tactic in the book, attempting to paint me as an emotionally abusive and financially irresponsible husband, twisting past arguments and fabricating accusations to gain leverage. She even tried to subpoena personal emails and financial records from years ago, hoping to unearth some damaging information. Our kids were once again caught in the middle of this ugly and protracted mess. Emily, while still deeply hurt and disappointed by her mother's actions, felt a sense of conflicted loyalty and urged me to try and be fair to Sarah, not fully grasping the extent of her mother's manipulative behavior. Michael, however, remained firmly on my side, his anger and disappointment towards Sarah intensifying with each new unreasonable demand she made. He became fiercely protective of me, offering to testify about her behavior and even researching information online to help my lawyer build a stronger case. After months of stressful and emotionally draining legal wrangling, countless meetings with lawyers and tense mediation sessions, we finally reached a settlement, albeit one that left me feeling somewhat depleted and resentful. I had to concede more assets than I felt was fair, including a significant portion of my retirement savings, but I managed to retain the majority of what we had built together over 2 decades, and thankfully, I was able to keep the antique clock that held so much sentimental value. The judge, thankfully, seemed to see through Sarah's manipulative tactics and her lawyer's aggressive strategy, awarding her only a minimal amount of alimony, barely enough to cover her basic living expenses, and far less than the exorbitant sum she had so greedily demanded. The divorce was finally and irrevocably finalized, the decree arriving in the mail like a cold, official confirmation of the end of an era. Just like that, 22 years of marriage, filled with both joy and now immense pain, were reduced to a stack of legal documents. The finality of it hit me hard, a profound sense of loss, and the stark realization that the life I had envisioned for myself was gone forever. Yet, amidst the sadness, there was also a sense of weary relief that this toxic and painful chapter of my life was finally, truly over. In the quiet months that followed the official end of our marriage, the inevitable whispers began to circulate through our remaining mutual acquaintances, painting a rather bleak picture of Sarah's new reality. It seemed that the grand, exciting new life she had envisioned with Jake Miller hadn't quite materialized, and karma, it appeared, had a rather cruel sense of irony. The relationship with Jake Miller, the immature and seemingly aimless younger man who had been the catalyst for our divorce, imploded in a rather spectacular fashion not long after she moved into her smaller, significantly less luxurious apartment. Apparently, once the thrill of the forbidden had faded and Sarah was no longer the exciting married woman he was secretly seeing, Jake's interest waned with alarming speed. I heard through a mutual friend that he started ignoring her calls and texts, offering increasingly flimsy excuses about being busy with work or hanging out with his friends. The final, rather pathetic blow came when he abruptly ended their relationship via a brief and impersonal text message, something along the lines of, "This isn't really working out for me. You're a great woman, but you deserve someone your own age." The sheer irony of his words, considering their initial dynamic, was almost comical, if not so sad for Sarah in a way. Sarah, who had undoubtedly envisioned Jake as her steadfast partner in this new, liberated chapter of her life, was reportedly devastated by his callous dismissal. The youthful validation she had so desperately sought, and for which she had sacrificed her marriage and family, had vanished like a fleeting dream, leaving her alone and facing the harsh, unvarnished realities of her impulsive and selfish choices. Financially, her situation was far from stable. The meager alimony she received, a direct result of her aggressive and ultimately unsuccessful legal tactics, barely covered her basic living expenses, a stark contrast to the comfortable and privileged lifestyle she had grown accustomed to during our marriage. She was forced to sell some of her more expensive jewelry, designer handbags, and even a few pieces of valuable furniture just to make ends meet. The job market proved to be particularly unforgiving for someone in their mid-50s who had been out of the full-time workforce for a significant period. And she eventually had to take a lower level, rather demeaning administrative job at a small, struggling company, a far cry from her previous executive position and a significant blow to her pride. Our kids remained emotionally distant. Emily, despite her initial attempts at neutrality, had grown increasingly disillusioned with her mother as the divorce proceedings revealed the extent of Sarah's deceit and greed. She would occasionally agree to a strained and uncomfortable lunch with her, mostly out of a sense of familial obligation rather than genuine affection. But the easy camaraderie and close bond they once shared were irrevocably broken, replaced by a noticeable awkwardness and a lingering sense of disappointment. Michael, true to his word, remained completely estranged from Sarah, his anger and disappointment unwavering. He continued to refuse to answer her calls, respond to her emails, or even acknowledge her attempts to reach out through mutual acquaintances, making it abundantly clear that he had no desire to have her in his life. I even heard through a friend that Sarah had made several desperate attempts to reconnect with some of our old mutual friends, hoping to find some semblance of her former social circle and garner some much-needed support. However, many of them had sided firmly with me, disgusted by her actions and the callous way she had treated me after so many years. She was often met with polite but firm refusals, vague excuses about being busy, or simply unanswered messages, leaving her increasingly isolated and alone. The overall picture painted by these fragmented reports was one of profound isolation, financial struggle, and deep regret. Sarah, who had so impulsively sought a new and exciting life with a younger man, found herself facing the stark consequences of her choices. Alone in a small apartment, struggling to make ends meet, and estranged from her children and many of the friends who had once been a part of her life. While I didn't actively wish her ill, I couldn't deny a sense of grim satisfaction that her selfish actions and her pursuit of a fleeting infatuation had not led to the happy, carefree existence she had so carelessly pursued, and that she was now facing the lonely and difficult reality she had created for herself. As for me, life after the divorce has been a challenging but ultimately rewarding journey of healing, self-discovery, and rebuilding. It certainly hasn't been easy, and there are still days, especially around holidays or significant dates, when the memories resurface and a familiar pang of sadness or anger will briefly surface. But slowly, steadily, I'm building a new life for myself, one based on honesty, integrity, and genuine connections with people who truly care about me. My relationship with my kids has blossomed into something even stronger and more meaningful than before. Emily, now graduated and starting her own career, has become a close confidant and a constant source of support and understanding. Michael, while still harboring some understandable anger towards his mother, has become incredibly protective of me, checking in regularly and offering unwavering support. We talk frequently, sharing our lives and offering each other comfort, and their love and unwavering belief in me have been my anchor throughout this tumultuous storm. I've fully embraced my long-neglected hobbies, finding solace and joy in activities I had forgotten I loved. Hiking in the local trails has become a therapeutic ritual, allowing me to clear my head and reconnect with nature. My photography skills are steadily improving, providing a creative outlet and a new way to see the world. I've also met some wonderful and supportive people through my hiking group, forming genuine friendships that have enriched my life in unexpected ways. Dating is still something I'm approaching with a healthy dose of caution, but I'm no longer ruling it out entirely. I've been on a few dates with some genuinely lovely and interesting women, and while nothing serious has developed yet, I'm feeling more optimistic and open to the possibility of finding love again when the time is right. I know I deserve happiness and a fulfilling relationship, and I'm trusting that the future holds that for me. Looking back on the 22 years I spent with Sarah, I'm consciously trying to remember the good times, the happy memories of raising our children and building a life together, without letting the bitterness and pain of her betrayal completely overshadow everything. There were undoubtedly many joyful moments, and I can't deny that we shared a significant part of our lives. But I've also come to accept that perhaps our foundation wasn't as strong or as honest as I had once believed. And her choices ultimately revealed a fundamental incompatibility that was always lurking beneath the surface. I've accepted that that chapter of my life is now firmly closed, and I'm embracing the new one with a renewed sense of hope, resilience, and a quiet determination to create a fulfilling and happy future for myself. I've learned through this painful experience that I am far stronger and more resilient than I ever imagined, and that I am absolutely capable of finding happiness and fulfillment on my own terms. Thank you again to each and every one of you who offered your support, advice, and kind words during this incredibly difficult and painful time in my life. Sharing my story here on Reddit helped me feel less alone in my suffering and provided a much-needed outlet for my raw emotions and frustrations. Your insights and encouragement, often from complete strangers, were truly invaluable and helped me navigate the darkest days. Life has a way of throwing unexpected and often devastating curveballs, and sometimes the people we trust and love the most are the ones who inflict the deepest wounds. But it's important to remember, as I have learned through this ordeal, that you are not alone in your pain, and that healing, though it takes time and effort, is absolutely possible. There is life after betrayal, and while the scars may remain, they can also serve as a reminder of your strength and resilience. If you thought that was crazy, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild stories. And if you didn't quite enjoy it, feel free to hit the dislike. Your feedback means a lot. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think, or share your own experiences. And don't forget to check out my other videos for more insane tales. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.